I'm just going to briefly give an overview of why we decided to go down the path of introducing a container refund scheme, just give a bit of a snapshot of the development process, some of the key elements, some of the similarities and some of the differences between our scheme and other schemes, and then just some reflections on the journey and some of our learnings and experiences. So it's going to be a bit of a speed dating exercise because I've only got 10 minutes. And then I'll hand over to Glenda to do the nitty-gritty about how the scheme sort of operates. So everyone's probably familiar with Queensland, so I'm not going to bore you with too many statistics about how big we are and how different we are, but I will. Queensland's a bit over twice the size of New South Wales. We've got the most decentralised population of any Australian state, with nearly 48% of people living in regional and remote areas. The distance from the Queensland border to Cairns is over 1,800 kilometres, and then the distance from Cairns to the top of the Cape is another 1,000 kilometres. And then if you look east to west, Townsville to Mount Isa is about just over 900 kilometres. Brisbane to Birdsville is about 1,600 kilometres. And in all of those distances and statistics, there's an awful lot of nothing, where there's no people. There's probably more kangaroos and emus than there are people in some of the areas. So it makes introducing something like a container refund scheme quite an interesting challenge, but it also presents some really good and interesting opportunities as well. Sure. So basically the context for the scheme was we have a recycling rate of less than 50%. So at 2017-18, latest data was just over 45%. And basically that's flatlined probably for about the last 5 years. It's increased very marginally, but by less than 1% between last year and the year before. So clearly there's a bit of an issue going on there. According to the National Litter Index reports, Queensland is consistently one of the most littered states, which is not something that we're proud to be winning. So, two things that we want to address. In Queensland, about a quarter of our population doesn't have access to any form of recycling service. 38 of the 77 councils that we have provide a curbside recycling service. Some of the more regional councils who don't have curbside do provide a recycling ability for people to bring some recyclables to transfer stations. But a lot of the population and a lot of the councils don't have that ability for people to be able to recycle. And not only do we have remote mainland areas, we have a lot of island communities as well, including 4 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island councils. So there's some challenges presented in that as well. Our challenges, we've got long transport distances, we've got small volumes of materials in these areas, and some areas for us in North Queensland are inaccessible for a lot of months during the wet season. But there are a lot of opportunities, and what we saw in the consultation when we were talking about introducing the scheme was certainly it provides an opportunity and an ability for people to recycle. There are significant social and community benefits associated with the introduction of a scheme. We've seen from our experience, and just 6 months into the scheme's operation, a significant number of new jobs have been created. New businesses have started. There are environmental benefits. We've had innovative local solutions start up. It provides a clean stream of material because the containers are separated into their material streams, and we've had new processing and manufacturing investment start up off the back of the scheme providing some certainty and security of material coming through. So there's some very positive aspects of why you'd sort of want to go down that path. Just a really quick snapshot of development. So it was sort of 3 years, I guess, from thinking about let's have a look and see whether it's feasible for us to do, to actually putting something on the ground. So 1st of November our scheme started. That was a quick 10 minutes, thanks Mike. So we went through a process of doing an investigation. The government announced it was going to introduce a scheme. We released a discussion paper that we had about 2,600 submissions to. June 2017, legislation passed in Parliament, so we made substantial amendments to our Waste Reduction Recycling Act to provide the ability for the scheme to be introduced and for us to do what we wanted to do around the scheme. In November 2017, we appointed our Product Responsibility Organisation, and that was a ministerial appointment. We didn't go out to tender for that, but it was basically an invitation to an eligible company and eligible under the Act to apply to be appointed to be the Product Responsibility Organisation. And then so that was 12 months before the scheme started. And then, as I said, on the 1st of November last year, the scheme commenced. So looking at it on a slide, that looks really simple and straightforward, but yeah, there was a lot of work to get to that point. And as Alex alluded to in his talk, really, the 1st of November, that was just the start. Then the implementation and the rest of the work is still going on about how we're now implementing, and the things that we're finding that are working really well, the things that we're finding that if we knew then what we knew now, we would have done slightly differently to be more efficient and to be more effective around some of the design issues. I just wanted to touch on, very briefly, on the similarities between Queensland's scheme and everyone else's. There's a little bit made of some of the, everyone's scheme's different and why can't we all harmonise, but there are a lot of similarities between everyone's schemes. And they're probably in sort of a lot of the areas where it matters, because there are people who are playing in national markets. Beverage manufacturers sell nationally, so it makes absolute sense to have a consistent refund amount. It makes absolute sense to have the same containers that are eligible and excluded. The only difference with that is that New South Wales ACT and our scheme does to the between 150 mil and 3 litres, whereas South Australia and Northern Territory go right down to 0 to be included. Everyone's got a legislated scheme, but I think where the differences are is in some of the execution and the rollout and the how it's done, really. So there's just a couple of slides about those containers are the ones that you can get your 10 cents back on. So almost everything at the conference except the wine and champagne bottles you could have taken home and got your 10 cents on. And they're the ones that are excluded as well. And by and large, people are pretty familiar with that. They're very understanding, and they know what's in and what's out, and there's not a lot of confusion coming through our scheme and refund points anyway. So where the differences start, I guess for us, we've got a scheme that's got 5 legislated scheme objectives, and they're not in any particular order. So one of our objectives was to increase recycling. If you remember, 45% recycling rate in Queensland, it's not a pass. So it was a key thing for us to be looking at how can we increase that number. We also wanted to decrease litter. The other statistic that we had was consistently the most littered state. We've done so far, or had done for us, one post-commencement litter survey, and that was in February, I think. In February, your surveys were done? Yeah. And that survey indicates that we've got about a 35% reduction in the amount of beverage containers or beverage container litter. So 4 months after the scheme started, compared to October 2018 results, that's all right, 35%. It's a shiny new toy at the moment, and obviously one survey isn't going to make a trend, but over time we'll get some good, robust figures and trends, and we'll be able to more accurately determine the performance of the scheme in that space. One of the other objectives is that the scheme has to deliver social enterprise and community benefits. So one of the requirements for large container refund point operators is that they have to provide free community infrastructure, so that that allows community organisations, schools, charities to be able to set up a bin, a cage, some signage around it, to be a donation point for the community, or their local school community even, to bring containers that then they can get the benefit of the 10 cents for. Scheme has to deliver innovation and technology outcomes as well, and it has to complement existing recycling services. So not only were we looking at complementing existing curbside services, but other recycling services like scrap metal collections, some of the things that councils might already be doing in their own local area with collecting metals and plastics at transfer stations, etc. Okay. So our legislation establishes that an eligible company has to be or may be invited to make an application to be appointed. The appointment was done by direct appointment by the Minister. Our product responsibility, Container Exchange, is not a statutory authority. They are a not-for-profit company that's established under corporations law, and they're responsible for delivering every aspect of the scheme. So we have no network operator level. The PRO is responsible for contracting with beverage manufacturers, contracting with container refund point operators, logistics and processing service providers. They're responsible for communicating and promoting the scheme, dealing with complaints, and we basically did that so that we had one entity responsible for everything to do with the scheme, and they had line of sight over everything to do with the scheme. The PRO also has responsibility for making sure that a minimum of 307 container refund points are delivered by the 1st of November this year across Queensland. And that includes in the remotest parts of Queensland, Metro, Brisbane. Glenda's got to go. I might leave it there, except just to say that we have also legislated a container recovery target of 85% by the end of year 4 of the scheme, and we've also legislated the 307, which is a minimum. So those two areas around accessibility and convenience for people, and making sure that we actually delivered good recovery and increased our recycling rates were key things that we wanted to make sure were delivered and legislated in the scheme. So I might leave it there and let Glenda do, because she's got to catch a plane. But then if there's any questions later, I'll come back.
My name's Glenda Viner and I work for Container Exchange. So COEX is the product responsibility organisation that Kylie mentioned was statutory appointed by the Queensland Government. I will make sure that the slides go out to you, but the videos that I was showing you are on the Containers for Change website, so please access them. We are a non-for-profit organisation that reports to a 9-member board through to the Queensland Minister for Environment. We're responsible for managing Queensland's Container Refund Scheme, Containers for Change. As we are Queensland-based, you may not have seen our brand, but we are using behavioural economics to drive participation in the scheme. So while we had some high-profile opportunities to demonstrate the rationale and the reason for the scheme, everybody on LinkedIn and Facebook and all those Social media platforms see the rationale for these litter reduction schemes, especially in our waterways and oceans. So people understand the rationale for why we're doing that. So we actually built a big fish, and I wasn't even going to talk about the big fish, I was just going to show you the beautiful picture made out of 800 containers by a Queensland sculptor. And what it was actually demonstrating was that this is the type of activity we're trying to reduce, is that people mindlessly throwing litter into the ocean and into our waterways and into our environment. So we recognised that we had a big job to tell Queenslanders, and we had a multifactorial purpose: reducing litter, increasing recycling, improving the Queensland environment, community group and charity fundraising, and employment opportunities. So a big list to be ticking. We did some significant marketing research early, and that indicated that we needed to be driving the majority of our population to consider what would actually motivate them to participate in the scheme. And what we recognised through that research was that it was about loss aversion rather than personal gain. So people needed to think about not throwing away the 10 cents rather than gaining 10 cents. Apparently that was the most highly rated lens that people put across it, that they didn't want to lose the 10 cents. So the incentive to not throw away money, or the next one was to gain money, was a result of our research. And so our marketing, that I can't show you, was based around that. So don't throw that can away, don't throw away your containers, there's cash in those containers. Now, while the COEX external relations team considered we had a big job ahead of us with a target of 80% awareness within 3 years, the operations team needed to do more. They had to open at least 232, and we opened 250 container refund points. So that's 250 locations opening on the one day of different types, sizes and complexities across the state. So just imagine if you were opening up 250 IGAs across the state all on the one day. It was a large effort, and we did pretty well. I now have the beautiful video explaining about how our scheme works through container refund points that operate as depots or bag drops, and how we manage that. It's on our website, Containers for Change. But what it actually recognised, we realised very quickly, and Kylie will attest to this, is that people had been watching the RVM experience in New South Wales. People thought that they were going to find a reverse vending machine on every corner in Queensland, and that's not going to happen in Birdsville or even in Cairns. So this required us to respond in an agile way to ensure our customers and communities understood how the scheme worked. So from a customer experience viewpoint, we had to get some help to explain how it worked. It's a very funny video. I'll say it again, it's on Containers for Change. Our impact to date has been promising, as at the end of April, we have had more than 420 million containers returned. So that's more than $78 million returned to scheme customers, communities and operators. And from a community point of view, we have seen more than 620 new jobs created across the state. And we are now heading towards more than 300 container refund points. A point of difference for Queensland is the ability for our customers and community groups to register for the scheme and to make the choice whether to receive their payment by electronic funds transfer, by accessing the convenience and bag drops. So bag drops can also occur at depots. They don't have to just be a standalone pod or a standalone container. That can happen at most depots as well, and people who are very busy are finding this is very useful. Charities and community groups in particular can benefit with this by publicising their scheme ID through their networks to be able to garner donations from customers across the state. So what we actually see, my grandson lives in Cairns, I might take my containers to a West End depot, I give them his scheme ID and that money goes into his account. So wherever you are in Queensland, if you've got your scheme ID, you can actually use that. So for charities and social enterprise, that's been really interesting. At the end of 6 months, we are doing okay. And this was a brave slide because I had the New South Wales total after 6 months and then the Queensland total after 6 months, but I didn't write down the figures. But what I can say that it's not all about COEX. We have done pretty well. So New South Wales was approximately 350 million and Queensland was at 464 million at the end of the first 6 months. So a little bit ahead. What's worked well? We are tracking towards our targets. We have diversity in the market, which suits the Queensland landscape, and we are ahead in our projected returns and our customer awareness is high. What we need to work on is managing our customer expectations and about how the scheme works in their community, managing the challenges of our diverse market offering. For example, some operators using plastic bags to bring in at bag drops, not a great look when you're in a state that doesn't use single-use plastic bags. We're continuing to work on our industry partners to inform, educate and engage on how we can collaborate to meet our joint objectives. One of our most interesting challenges is how we can work with rural and remote communities to deliver on our objectives. As Kylie mentioned, we have a big challenge in the far north of the Cape. We've got 11 pop-ups in the far north, Cape York, and that requires over 2,000 kilometres a week of travel. In the central Cape, a return trip is about 550 for 4 container refund points, and they're very small volumes. Okay, so what we need to do now is to focus on social enterprise, and I would suggest that people have a look at the Cherbourg Aboriginal Council site. They are doing some fantastic things there, and we're hoping to expand that opportunity. Thank you.